All right. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Deconversion Stories. Today, we have the absolute, honor and pleasure of chatting with this gentleman right here, Mr. Dan Barker, who you guys know is one of the co-founders of Freedom from Religion Foundation, where we've also had, if you remember, I don't know if you guys remember this, but we had Andrew Sadell on here and talked about his book and stuff like that. And today, we're going to listen to a little bit about Dan's deconversion, obviously, because that's what we do here. And we're also going to talk about his upcoming book called Contradiction. One of the first things that I want to know about this book. Actually, I'll ask that right off the hop before we even get into this, Dan. First of all, welcome to the show, Dan.
Hi, thanks. Finally, I'm sorry I missed the last
one. Look, we have gadgets now. I don't even know where that came from. Yeah, the first one, a bit of a what, as I always say, shit happens, right? And so we rescheduled, and here we are today. Where did you come up with the name Contradiction? Like, give us sort of a little bit of a backstory on that
one. Oh, okay. Well, the book's out now. It came out in September.
Ooh.
And
right.
It's been blurbed by a lot of people: Steven Pinker and the philosopher A.C. Grayling and Ron Reagan and Andrianne and just a bunch of people. Phil Zuckerman. And I was doing a debate in March of 2022. I've done a bunch of debates. I've never challenged anyone to a debate, actually, but I keep getting invited. So to date, I have done 140 public, formal, moderated debates since 1985. Wow. And that sounds like a lot, 140, but that's like 3 or 4 a year, they spread out. And so I've done them at Harvard. I've done 2 at Oxford University. And apologists, theologians, scholars, sometimes local preachers. But I was invited to Florida to do a debate in Orlando in March of 2022 with Adam Lloyd Johnson on the topic, Does God Exist? Mm-hmm. And in his opening statement, he said, I'm not going to argue for the specifics of Christianity. I'm going to argue for mere theism, is what the word he used. And I will be using an abductive argument. and he did. He used an abductive argument. And I happen to know that that's not a very common word, but abductive argument sounds like a big fancy thing. All it means it's our best guess, basically. It's not really deductive or inductive or any of that. It's kind of like what you might do to come up with a list of prime suspect in a murder investigation. It doesn't get you anywhere, but at least it gives you a suspect. Mm-hmm. So when I got up to give my opening statement, I was thinking about that word abductive, and I was thinking about how a lot of his arguments and a lot of apologist arguments are actually backward. They're totally reversed of reality. They're flipped, and I've been thinking about this for years. Thinking about this for years, how it's totally backwards. They're thinking it's one way and it's not the other. And I just sort of ad-libbed during the debate. And if you want to watch it online, you can see me. I was ad-libbing. I was saying, well, my opponent used the word abductive. I think we need a new word called, and I just said postductive, which the audience didn't seem very impressed with that. And they shouldn't have been, because it's the totally wrong word. I was just making it up, and it was only a month or 2 later that I realized, I need a prefix that doesn't mean after, that I need a prefix that means reversed. So I thought contraductive is what I'm thinking about. It's a fallacy. It's not a form of reasoning. Like deduction and induction are forms of reasoning, and abduction is kind of a loose, sloppy form of reasoning. But contradiction is a fallacy before the reasoning starts. If you're off on the wrong foot, if your foot is pointing the wrong way, your argument's going to be unsound, and you don't even know why. And I gave some silly
examples. It's going to be uncomfortable to walk.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's like, the Ptolemaic solar system back in, when was that, the 2nd century? Ptolemy assumed that the sun rises and the sun sets, because that even the Bible says that the sun rises and sets where it is. And based on that assumption that he didn't even know was wrong, he just assumed it was right, he came up with this weird system of spheres within spheres to account for the
Yeah.
retrograde motion of the planets and all that stuff. The Ptolemaic system.
Ellipses.
Yeah, and it kind of worked, but it was so ultra complicated, big Rube Goldberg thinking, and he had to come up with something like that because he didn't realize that his thinking was contradictive, meaning it's not the sun that's rising, it's we who are rising. If you assume a geocentric solar system and a flat Earth, then you're starting off on the wrong foot. Your reasoning is totally backward, and you don't even know it. Another example I gave was the person who's so amazed. How did they make all those rivers flow right along the state borders?
Right.
They do that. It must have been an amazing feat, expensive civic project of engineering to get that finely tuned rivers to be exactly at the border. How do you explain it? Well, of course, we realize that's backward, right? It's the rivers came first. It's reversed. And if you're starting off thinking the wrong way around, your reasoning is going to be messed up. So anyway, the book Contradiction, which came out recently, gives at least a dozen different examples of how our thinking can start off and not even know it. It's an innocent fallacy. We don't even realize we're making a mistake. And how if we reverse them, and of course the main thrust of it all was the fine-tuning argument. You hear that from apologists, which a lot of people say, and even like Christopher Hitchens said, you know what, their best argument is fine-tuning. Not that it's a good argument, and he said it's not a good argument, and of course it's not. But you got to think about it. It's you got to deal with it. You can't just blow it off. And so a big part of my book Contradiction deals with the so-called fine-tuning argument. Okay.
Yeah, I'm often reminded of the puddle analogy, where the puddle seems to think that the shape that he's sitting in is just made perfectly for him, when you don't realize that that's just how it ended up.
Yeah, the hole
is already there. Yeah.
By definition, a little puddle.
That was Douglas Adams who brought up that puddle. Analogy.
I had a minor encounter with Mr. Adams when he was living here in Vancouver area, and I saw him across the street.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw him across the street at a Starbucks. I was at a different coffee shop, and I went and I kind of did the nod thing, and he saw me nod. He goes, he just gave me a wave kind of thing. So
was that part of the improbability engine? You know.
Yes, the improbability engine. It just happened to be all the right place at the right time.
Be right there.
Yeah. It's such good stuff that guy writes.
You know, the rivers thing, like the rivers on the map and like the state lines and stuff like that. And then I'm thinking, and who pays for that crew to go out there and draw that big line between like Indiana and Illinois? Because there's a big line on the floor. So there's got to be a crew out there just painting a big white line in between the states.
Wow, Mikey, you can't see those lines from orbit, unfortunately.
There's just a crew out there just making sure the states stay separated.
That's right. All right. So Dan, give us a little bit of the whole process of your deconversion. I've personally heard your story, so I know quite a bit about it.
I have.
I've listened to your stuff quite often, but just kind of give us sort of a not really a nutshell, but a little bit of an explanation of how things started and what led you to finally going, you know what, I give up on this stuff.
And first, what was your flavor?
So you know that I was a preacher.
Yes.
I was an ordained minister. I started preaching when I was a teenager, and then I later got ordained, and then I preached after that. And I preached for 19 years, and I was a true believer. I really loved it. I thought it was the truth. I thought the Bible was reliable. I thought I had a personal relationship with Jesus, and that I had confessed my sins and been born again and all of that. And I prayed, and I often saw results of my prayer, God answering my prayers. I would pray in the Spirit and get goosebumps, even feeling the presence of God.
Quick second.
Every believer is different.
Yes, just a quick question. When you said you felt that your prayers were being answered, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you know, a true miracle would be if no prayers were ever answered. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
just by
I get the mindset.
coincidence, some of them have to be. People are praying for things that will actually happen. And so when they do, you count that, yes, yes. It's the confirmation bias. Yes, God answers prayer.
Yeah.
You forget about the 99 times when nothing happened or something worse happened. But once something does, and I have some amazing stories that I even can't really explain that look like answers to prayer, look like miracles.
Sure.
But and just because we don't have an explanation doesn't mean we should just knee jerk to God as the explanation.
Right.
But
I don't know, Dan, because with all these UFOs going around and going through Congress and everything, and then everyone's instant response is, so it's aliens. It's like, well, it just said unknown. So if you don't know what it is, how can it automatically be aliens?
yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
so aliens are consistent. Are a consistent hypothesis that might, you know what I mean? And God, to a lot of people, well, is a possible answer. And if you don't have an answer, and I do, well, there you go. But anyway, I believed it. I was not a phony. And I preached, I started carrying my Bible when I was a teenager, preaching on street corners. And I was a missionary to Mexico for 2 years, a total of 2 years. And I was an associate pastor of 3 different California churches,
Wow.
evangelical, Bible-believing churches. And then I was a cross-country evangelist for 8 years, driving around preaching and singing. And I was a Christian songwriter. I wrote musicals. And in fact, today I'm still getting royalties from those 1970s musicals that I wrote back then. And some of them became pretty big sellers. They were a bestseller for a man in music for a while. And I was the arranger and accompanist and pianist and sometimes co-composer with Manuel Bonilla, the largest, most famous Christian singer in the Spanish-speaking world. And we toured a lot, and a lot of our arrangements were played all over the radio. So I loved it. I thought I was called. I thought I was part of God's army. I thought that the world was going to end any moment and that Jesus was coming back and all of that. It was just so precious, you know what I mean? And I just loved it. I didn't feel phony. I didn't feel, what's the word? I didn't, I didn't see much hypocrisy. There was some hypocrisy in the church. Always there is, but I didn't see much of that.
Yeah,
Most of the
hypocrisy
people
everywhere.
But most of the people I associated with were sincere, that we really loved. We were sincerely wrong, but we were sincere. We just thought,
Yeah.
And it wasn't until my early 30s, and I admire people who, as children or young people, know how much baloney it is. For me, I don't know why it took me so long. like Annie Laurie, my wife's father, Paul Gaylor. He was a kid sitting in church in southern Missouri. He was like, I don't know, 9 or 11, or he was sitting in church one Sunday morning looking around, and he said, it dawned on me, my parents are nuts. He knew it. He knew it as a kid that they actually believe this stuff. And so I don't know how to explain why he and I were so different. Maybe it's a distribution curve of some of us tend to be more, I don't know, worshipful, mystical, obedient, and others are more skeptical. Probably that's by nature. Many of us are that way.
Well,
anyway,
did you have a lot of influence in your youth of other fairly religious people that may have set you into that mindset?
Yeah. Well, it was very confirming. My family was born again Christians, and my mom and dad, they met in a dance band, but they abandoned the worldly music and they became born agains. And we were at church at least 3 times a week, and I saw nothing wrong with that. I thought it was great. I thought I was so lucky. I was born into the right family, in the right religion, in the right denomination, in the right country, in the right time of history. I mean, you know what I mean? I just had this feeling of how blessed we were.
I was about to say, how blessed that sounds.
Well, and so I didn't have doubts. I had questions, and I think most Christians will tell you questions are fine, in that there are answers. But it wasn't until like my early 30s I I don't know, maybe I just started growing up in my brain. I started thinking, and I remember, and I've told the story a lot, but I remember, but at that time I was a cross-country evangelist traveling from church to church. So I met dozens or hundreds of pastors of various denominations, because it wasn't just the conservative born-again churches that were performing my musicals. It was more moderate and sometimes even liberal churches were performing that for part of their Christmas shows and that. And so I got invited all over. And before one of the evening services, we met with the pastor of this Baptist church. And you know, it's kind of like you pray, dear God, bless the meeting tonight, and that kind of a thing. And we were in his office, and he said, you know what? There are some people in my congregation, you won't believe this, but they don't think Adam and Eve were actually historical people. And I thought, what? What? And you let them be members? What? I was thinking that, you know, I didn't say that to him. And he said, don't get me wrong, I believe Adam and Eve were real people, but these people in my church, they're good people. They come all the time. They're good donors. They contribute their tithes, and they're a loving family, but they think that there's a lot of metaphor in the Bible. They think just like when Jesus told the parables of the prodigal son and the good Samaritan, he didn't intend us to think there actually was a prodigal son or a good Samaritan. Those were made up stories. And the important thing is the moral message of the stories, not whether or not the prodigal son had an address and a social security number. It was more like the story, it doesn't have to be true to be meaningful. And so these people in my church, he said,
like mythology.
They think Adam and Eve also were like just metaphorical. It was an early parable that the ancient Israelites used to explain and to teach a moral truth. And what is a more significantly moral part of the Bible than the fall of the human race in the garden, right? That whole thing. And I was shocked. I thought, whoa, this is heresy. But I remember something clicked in my brain. I didn't discard Adam and Eve. What clicked in my brain was, well, you know what? Those are good Christians, and we shouldn't let something like that come between our fellowship. We can disagree. And I know you probably think that's a tiny little point, but for a fundamentalist to say something like that, to say we can disagree and still get along, that was a click that kind of started me. You know, I didn't just jump from there to atheism. It took 4 or 5 years of gradually thinking and reading more about science, reading more about philosophy, and reading about humanism, reading about evolution, because I wanted to be more informed. And suddenly there's this big thirst to learn, just out of nowhere, just came like, I want to know this stuff. I want to know what I'm talking about. I don't want to be some stupid preacher up there just reciting Bible verses. I want to know. And so that started the process. And after about 4 or 5 years, I sort of gradually moved. And, Christianity is not just one solid block religion. There may be as many Christianities as there are Christians, and they all fall across this spectrum from conservative to liberal. And I moved across that spectrum little by little, by little by little, until I finally got to the end and realized that, if the prodigal son is just a parable, and if Adam and Eve are just a metaphor, then what else in the Bible is just, maybe even Yahweh and God, maybe even they are just some big figure of speech that the human race is a parable that the human race is telling itself to give ourselves meaning. And so that just sort of, you know what I mean? I didn't like the word atheist or even know the word atheist. I just thought, this is weird. I was still preaching, and I still preached for about 5 or 6 more months until I finally sent out a letter to everybody saying, I can't do this anymore. And that was in 1984. That was 40 years ago. So it seems like ancient history, but I can still remember all of that.
Well, on a human time scale, that would be. but on a universal timescale, that's nothing. But
That's nothing.
no, um, like the way you were thinking when you first started having sort of the questions, like the first one that popped up was the Adam and Eve thing for you. Like, how could there be people that don't believe this? I faced a lot of that myself. You see, I have a little bit of a different story, whereas I was actually born to a Christian couple, well, Catholic more specific, but they weren't married. So I was put up for adoption, and I was raised in the Jewish faith. So, which I always thought was, people always say, well, I'm in the right religion. Well, apparently, according to you Christians or Catholics, I was already in the right religion. And then God allowed me to be brought up in the wrong one for some reason. So what the hell happened there? So I already had that mindset even as a kid, right? Like, because my folks told me about me being adopted, and a little bit about all they knew about them was what they used to be. They didn't know names or anything. So, and I thought, well, that's weird. So the whole time for me growing up and having to deal with these stories, because we did the Old Testament, obviously, and all these stories just felt like, even though I wanted to believe, and I even tried praying, for a friend of mine to get better from some disease that popped up out of nowhere on him, and none of that ever worked. And I just thought to myself, well, I guess I'm right, because I kept saying to myself, this all just reads like mythology to me, like all the other mythologies that I've read, even at that point, some Greek or Roman mythology. It just read the same way to me. A little bit more poetic, I guess you could say, because some of the word usage and stuff like that. But so I tried to believe and couldn't myself for the longest time. And by the time I finished with my bar mitzvah, I was like, yeah, you know what? I don't believe any of this stuff anymore. So I even tried to live in Israel for a couple of years before it went squirrely back in the 80s. So you became a non-believer in 84, technically, and I graduated high school in 84. So, and I graduated over there. And I tell you, you speak to a lot of the people over there in the Holy Land, and not many of them are actual believers. I find that most of the real believers really just live in and around Jerusalem, and everybody else just seems to be more secular, more humanist based. And that's the first place I ever heard the word humanism, was in Israel, actually. I don't know what happened with Mikey. Might have been a little emergency thing going on there. I'm sure he'll join us.
He felt the spirit probably, and
yeah, now he's we'll have to kick him off the show now.
we have a little joke in the United States. What do you call a Jew who doesn't believe in God?
Okay, this is one I have not heard.
A Jew.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Most of my Jewish friends, and I played in a klezmer band. You know what klezmer music is?
Yep, I certainly
played piano for years, and with all these Jewish weddings and bar mitzvahs and things. Beautiful. I mean, just great time. And I don't think I met one believer. But what it was is a culture. They loved the food. They loved the history. Yeah. They loved and this one father said, for me, Passover means pass the food over.
Yeah.
And that's what it was to them. And they love their grandmother, and some of them, even the atheist Jews, they'll sing the prayer songs because grandma used to sing those songs, and it's meaningful to them. And that's culture. I mean, there's some pride in all of that, I think. Yeah.
I think so too. I totally agree. And that's my sister actually stopped inviting me to the Passover meals. Well, she got away with it one year, and I spoke up about it. I'm like, what are you doing? You got to invite me for the food. Like, I don't care about all the rest, but I want to be there for the food. And she's like, oh, all right. But stop saying stupid things while we're trying to read the Haggadah. I just started laughing. I'm like, all right, I'll behave. So, and it's been good since then.
What you're celebrating is the massacre of a bunch of innocent children.
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned that one time, not during the dinner, but outside the dinner, and she did not like that very much. But oh well, that's okay. Because her husband is actually I guess you could say, a standby rabbi. Like, he's been through rabbinical training, so he could walk in and run a service if need be. But I don't think he's ever done it, at least not that I know of. But he's always on the sidelines just in case. So pretty interesting.
Like
So,
a spare tire rabbi. Huh?
yeah.
The understudy for the rabbi.
Yeah, something like that. The understudy. Yeah, there you go. All right, so let's talk a little bit, I think, more about the book. Like, what can people look forward to? Like, what kind of topics are you bringing up other than what you mentioned earlier?
Well, so the new book, this is my 11th book since joining the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Mhm.
The big takeaway from the book is a good argument against fine tuning. And that's the big final chapter. And I build up to it with examples, because contradiction is not just religion, it's all sorts of things. I
Sure.
talk about sleep, I talk about mirrors, I
Mhm.
talk about free will, I talk about life itself. Is life something that comes into an organism, or is life something that goes out of an organism? If you think about flipping things around, I talk about morality, a whole chapter. Is morality something that's comes from above, or is it something that comes bottom up? Is it top down or bottom up? And that's contradiction. Which way is it? And if it's top down, you're following the orders of some, commanding
Entity.
officer or slave master or whatever. But if it's bottom up, we are measuring morality by real consequences in the real world, not by some
Sure.
top down. And chapter on the Big Bang and the universe. And I question, and I say in the introduction, you might disagree with some of these chapters, and I'm just using them. And in fact, some of the pre-readers, I had about 45 pre-readers. Some of them said, I disagree with chapter 3. I disagree with this one. But that's not a contradiction. So they're disagreeing, but they're using the word contradiction. So I think that's
Right.
cool. And so there's room to disagree. And in fact, I welcome disagreement. And I even printed some of it in the book. Instead of calling it a big bang, I'm calling it a big bust. Instead of thinking of creation from nothing, maybe it's the other way. Maybe it's non-creation from everything. Maybe whatever that singularity was, it's now winding down. And in fact, it is winding down.
Yeah.
It's not being created. But in the process, I use the analogy of if you have a pot of boiling water and then you turn the heat off, what happens? It doesn't immediately just go back to room temperature. It cools, and the bubbles are still rising while the whole system is cooling, and the bubbles are getting smaller. So I use the analogy: those stars out there are those bubbles that are temporarily still rising while the whole system is cooling down. We happen to be living on a planet by a star, which is reversing the second law of thermodynamics. Not reversing it, but I mean, because
It's what it is.
we're not in a closed system. So we have the illusion that it's a creation from nothing when it might be the other way around. Anyway, you can disagree with that, but the point is that there are, and since the book, people have suggested other contradictions. And one that Mandisa Thomas, if you know her, she's the founder and president
Great lady.
of Black Unbelievers. She and I were in Nigeria last month. We went there for a big humanist event, which was really a blast. And one day we took a tour. We took a tour of the slave trade over by the Nigerian coast there to see where the slaves were getting on the boats. That was really sad. But one example of contradiction goes back to the 18th century, when white Europeans were first trying to come up with the concept of race. Before that time, we really didn't have an idea of what race is. And they were struggling, especially in France. And many of them were benefits of the slave trade, by the way. They were struggling with, how do we explain why the Africans, what's wrong with their skin? Why is it so dark? Is it burnt from the sun? They're trying to come up with all, and so they even had a contest, and they had essays about explaining what's degenerate about the skin color of those people down there. And they didn't realize at the time that it's totally backwards. The dark eyes and the dark skin is the natural pigmentation of the human species, and the mutation is white. So the degeneration of our species is the light skin. And so they got it backwards.
I'm glad you said it, Dan. I'm glad you said it. I didn't want to tell everybody, but I'm glad you said it out loud.
Well, we know that's true. And actually it conferred a survival advantage on our species who went to live north because of the vitamin D, they needed to, that mutation of the failure of full pigmentation to the skin was beneficial to allow then for more vitamin D. But the thing is, those guys back then didn't know. They had it in their, they were like Ptolemy with the sunrise. They had it totally backwards. From their point of view, they were viewing the world one way when actually it's reversed. And the problem with contradiction comes because we assume that our point of view is like, have you ever been sitting in a train that's not moving and the train
sure.
next to you starts to move?
Oh, it's so weird.
And you briefly think it's you? That's a contradiction.
You're going backwards.
Yeah, that's a contradiction. Your brain is interpreting from your point of view what the world is like. And so you view it as if it was you who was moving when actually the reverse is happening. So there are many examples of contradictory thinking in our minds that we don't even realize are happening. Of course, it doesn't take long to realize that it's the other train that's moving. But for that brief minute, you have this kind of, weird feeling.
That happens to me at the stoplight. If you're on a hill and then there's trucks and the trucks start moving before you or something like that, and you're like, my car's sliding backwards. What is happening? Oh.
Yeah. I think that happens to all of us on a plane or in a car or something.
Well, the best part of the plane ride is the takeoff anyways. That's what shoves you right back in your seat.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, this is speed.
Now we're talking.
I thought it was
Just
faith.
don't crash.
I thought it was faith that made it
uplifts
fly.
the plane. Yeah. Well, no, it's experience and pilots. But yeah.
Our worship of Isaac Newton. That's what gives us flight.
Yeah. Figuring out his.
We figured out low pressure systems.
Exactly. All right. I want to ask you a couple of things about FFRF. Now, the way things are going down there in the U.S. for you guys, it's not looking too promising with now Trump getting a second term, and a lot of the
now we dropped the United, just the states.
It's just the states. Okay. Now there's a lot of walls that were put up to keep church and state separate. Appears that some have already fallen, obviously, and some are more going to fall. Do you guys have at all any sort of plan, maybe with some other organizations, to fight back on this?
Well, so our national headquarters is in Madison, Wisconsin, and we have a border with Canada. So could we just could we just become a part of Canada? Maybe we could just annex ourselves or something. Like you guys could be like, you could be like Putin and come in and take us. Please.
Yeah, invade Chicago. Invade. Come through the water and just get Chicago.
Yeah, a lot of us admire Canada for many reasons, but
we have our problems too.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, of course. And some of them are the amnesty people that are still up there, but yeah. So yes, it's depressing. The Trump win. And our group, by the way, is not political. We have some Republicans in our membership. It doesn't follow that if you're an atheist, you're necessarily a liberal. There are
of course not.
There are conservative, and so we don't do endorsements. We do have a C4 group that can do that, but I'm the co-director of the C3 group, so we don't do political, and we have to be careful about how we keep that line drawn between the C3 and the C4. But we are also a member of a coalition called the Secular Coalition for America. There's about 22 groups, I guess, 22 national organizations that belong to it. And we just had a phone call a few days ago about what our strategy will be. And of course, first off, each of our groups has sort of slightly different agendas. We're all going to keep doing what we do, obviously. Even though the courts are changed and the Supreme Court is now, we had the problem with the Supreme Court before Trump's recent election. We already knew that it was packed with conservatives. And so strategies have to change. And the types of cases we take and the types of arguments we make. Once in a while, we'll go ahead with a case that we suspect we're likely to lose, but we know we're right. You know what I mean? We know we're right on it. We'll take the case. to make the point, to show, of course, that there are those of us who are not part of the majority Christian nationalist view. So we will continue. We have, I think it's 10 attorneys now. We just lost one, but I think we rehired another, specializing in constitutional law. And we've taken more than 100 lawsuits, and we've won more than half of them over the years. And
That's
we'll continue to do that, of course, basically on the Establishment Clause of our First Amendment.
Right.
And pushing for governmental neutrality. And the government needs to just back off and let us believe or not believe, whatever we want.
Yeah.
So we're going to continue that. And many of our lawsuits, some of our lawsuits, I should say, are coalition lawsuits. Like we're suing right now in the state of Louisiana over the push to put the 10 Commandments in every classroom. And so far we're winning. We're winning on that. It's not just us, it's also Americans United in the ACLU and other groups. And some of the plaintiffs in our lawsuit, they're not all atheists and agnostics. There are some deep believing plaintiffs, including some clergy who have joined as plaintiffs in our lawsuit. Clergy and there are a lot of really smart, good religious people who understand the importance of state church separation. So we're often joined by them because they think it cheapens their faith for the government to be doing it.
Correct.
So, and there's a lot of Jewish groups. A lot of Jews don't want the menorah in the state capitals because that's a precious private Jewish. But why is the government doing that? If some people think if you mix the two, they both get dirty. You don't want to. You want to keep it separate. So we're all gonna continue our work, of course. And of course, that week of the election, we had a spike in membership, and all the groups reported that. And what I say, there's got to be a better way to grow your membership than something like this. But so we're in it for the long haul, and of course, Trump's not going to be around forever. And I don't want to say the Republicans. I want to say the Christian nationalists, because I think there's Christian nationalists in both parties, but mostly the Republican right seems to be taken over by these extreme Christian nationalists.
It's almost like people thought the Klan went away. Oh, wait, they didn't. They didn't. They're still around. They're just
I know. I mean, it's really weird. They're
just forcing the 10 Commandments into schools now. Like they're still there, guys.
Yeah, and then in Oklahoma, that we're complaining about the superintendent of education there, Ryan Walters. If you've been following that at all, he's just a real
brown noser.
I mean, he seemed like a smart guy, but I mean, he's just really totally Christian nationalist devoted, and he thinks he can force all the schools and all the districts to. He wanted to. He made this video of him praying and supporting Trump, and he sent it to the superintendent saying, "You need to show this to all the students." Well, to their credit, a lot of local superintendents said, "No, we're not doing this. We're controlling our own educational agenda here, and you don't have the right as the state superintendent to dictate to us what we do." Right. He wanted to buy all the Trump Bibles, if you know that, and have pass them out in all the schools. So we're complaining about that. And this is another coalition case that a lot of us are joining. And
excellent.
As far as in the long run, there's going to be midterms coming up in 2 years. So there's going to be a lot of damage done. We're going to have to just suffer through a lot of this. And remember when Trump was first elected, one of the early things he did was this executive order overturning so-called the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment, which prohibits churches from doing electioneering and politicking. Correct. A lot of churches are doing it. And when they do, and we hear about it, we complain to the IRS. We ask the IRS, please investigate this church and this pastor, because members of ours around the country hear about this or see it. And so it's part of the bargain you strike by being a nonprofit, that you agree not to be political. So the donations to you are tax deductible. And if our group was violating that, if they, they'd come after us. If we were take away our tax exemption. But somehow churches think they are special. Churches and clergy think that they are an upper level the society, or clergy think they are a higher level of people blessed by God with
Sure,
this,
of course.
and they're not. They're
Goes
just
with the
people.
whole illusion or delusion, I should
They're
say.
just people, and they're not more moral. They're not more smart. They're not better. They might be in some cases better orators. I mean, some of them are wonderful. They have nothing to say, but they say it beautifully. You know what I mean? It's just I'd rather hear somebody who has something to say, no matter how they say it. I'd rather hear content. So we're going to continue,
Yeah.
and our groups are strategizing, and often before, we don't have to do this, of course, but often before a big lawsuit before the Supreme Court, our groups will confer and say, well, how about if you write a brief dealing with jurisdiction, and how about if you write your brief dealing with standing, and we'll write ours dealing with the merit. That way we're not duplicating efforts.
Right.
So a lot of the organizations are able to talk it through, and it's pretty neat when they get together and talk. Although each of us does maintain our autonomy, it can decide what we want to do, and sometimes we disagree. Sometimes the group disagree on lawsuits, but there is hope that through the coalition and through our strong membership, we're more than 40,000 paid members right now.
That's excellent.
And I say paid members because a lot of times groups count their members by how many likes they get on Facebook, but these are actually, if we did that, we've got like 1 million, but but we've got about 40,000 actual paid members all over the country, and some in Canada and some in other countries, who desperately care about what America should be, about what the world should be, really.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because we have a little expression in Canada: if it's good for Canada, it's good for the world. So it's kind of something that I can't remember where that started. I think it was South Park, to be honest, but yeah, that's kind of an expression we
should have Tim Hortons all over the U.S.
Don't threaten him with a good time.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of like Dunkin' Donuts better, but hey, that's just.
Ooh, they're gonna get kicked out, Neil.
No.
I want to know: does Freedom from Religion, do they have like a hotline or anything for reporting stuff like churches electioneering or anything like that? Because I'm pretty sure if the call went out to, hey guys, can you just go through TikTok and see if there's any churches electioneering? Like, probably still to this day, these idiot churches cannot stop. And the other things about the Democrats, and I'm just like, dude, I'm black. And when Obama was running for office, it was like we knew people were coming through and saying, say it now, take all your money. But now it's so hilarious that now I need the Trump Bible in a school. When we couldn't even say, go vote for Obama. Yes. They were like, nope, you better not.
Well, to answer your question, yes, we do. We used to have a telephone hotline, but now it's just online. You can go to FFRF.org, look under legal, and you can actually you can submit a complaint, and there's like there's a couple of dozen categories. It could be at the schools, it could be in the government, it could be symbolic, it could be prayer before city council, which happens a lot, and electioneering. And if you see a church or any nonprofit organization, for that matter, if you even see us doing it, you can contact the IRS yourself. In fact, that's nice if you do. Say, hey, by the way, this pastor so-and-so down on the corner of 3rd Street there is actually they have a marquee up there that says, vote for Trump or whatever. You can complain to the IRS, but we can do it as well. And one advantage of our group doing it is sometimes in a local community, people want to keep their heads down. They, if you have a local business in some town in Louisiana, you don't want people to know you're the local atheist or the complainer about Bibles in the school. Right. So we can do it on your behalf. If if there's a complaint, if the 3rd grade teacher is praying with students at a public school and you don't really want to complain and cause a ruckus, you can call us, and our attorneys will get a letter, and they're quick. They're ready. They've got these templates all ready to go. Like, especially during near graduation, some student will call or email and say, they're going to have a prayer at my graduation on Tuesday. We can get a letter out that day. We can get it to them, and we can explain to them that this is wrong, it's unconstitutional, and it should stop. And often, not often enough, but often just a letter itself is enough to stop the abuse.
Yeah.
So sometimes, and to their credit, once in a while, a superintendent or a principal doesn't know the law, and they're glad to be informed.
Right.
Once in a while, we'll get a letter of thanks from somebody. I didn't know that was wrong. Thanks for letting us know. And then they'll stop it. But more often, they just dig in. More often, they just want to, especially in the South. So we can do that. Go to FFRF.org and look under legal, and you could submit a complaint. And the more information you have, the better. And by the way, read the FAQs that are there, because sometimes it's not actionable. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about it.
Sure.
You know, if they're singing one Christmas carol in the high school program, winter program, just one Christmas carol out of a huge secular program, well, we can't complain about that, because it's not like they're really pushing religion. They're respecting diversity, right? But
it's part of the holiday too, so who cares?
Well, yeah, but if the whole show is Christmas carols and religious music and is being held in a local church, well, then we will complain about that. Mm-hmm. Especially sometimes the high school choir director is also the church choir director, so there's that entanglement going on, you know.
And smaller.
So we, you know, you can't guarantee what's actionable and what isn't, and what requires a letter and what doesn't. And sometimes it's that people will complain about things that are not really state church issues; they're private issues. Like at a private club, somebody's saying a prayer. Well, we can't control that. We can't complain about that. But in any event, look through the FAQs, and then when you do submit a complaint, give us as much information as you can, and then one of our legal people might get back to you and ask for more. Do you know the name of the so-and-so? Do you know the number of the bill? Do you know that kind of stuff? How much detail? Because we don't want to just fly off and make a complaint with full information.
Yeah, you need substance behind it. So
yeah,
you're going to make a complaint. Absolutely. Well, I think it's what you guys do is needed, and I think there should be more people out there doing stuff like that to sort of keep that separation. But honestly, there are other
groups. Well, Americans United is a big example. And
that's true. Yeah.
American Humanist has a legal, and American Atheist has a legal, and CFI sometimes joins in on these things. So, you know, and it's nice that it's not just one. It's nice that there's an alphabet soup of groups doing all these things.
That's good. I like that.
We had
think of some of those other ones.
We had this earlier. Progress Only. He's just won his seat for city council. He says, "I'm here a little late. Hello, Mr. Barker, from a multi-year FFRF member who was endorsed by FFRF Action Fund for my election victory this year." And let's. He got a good one in office, y'all. We got a good one in office.
So I should explain. The FFRF Action Fund is the separate C4 group that can do endorsements. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation is a 501c3, and we don't. So the endorsement that he's talking about, or he or she is talking about, is from the Action Fund. And there's overlap. There's some overlap between the two groups, but we're glad that we have a way of doing that now. So I'm glad that it worked out. How did they say how the election worked?
He won. Out?
Oh, great. Okay.
Yep. He won his seat.
There are secular people in government.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
In fact, there's a group called the Association of Secular Elected Officials, ASEO, which I don't know. I think they just started. I think they have 20 or 30, but there's got to be hundreds all over the country.
Absolutely. But you can't just go out there and run on, well, I'm an atheist and I'm not going to shove religion down your throat. They're like, an atheist and you want to trust that guy? No way. And so I'm interested to read your book because the pitfall that a lot of atheists fall into is trying to argue their objective morality or whatever to people who are bad faith debaters is something that I find a huge waste of time from so many people. So if someone's in that position where they're debating, they're trying to get that moral high ground on a Christian, like how do you debate something like that?
To get the
Well, I
moral
have a
high
book. I have a book called Mere Morality, and you might get the title if you know about C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. And most of us non-believers, I don't speak for all atheists, of course, but most of us think people should be judged by their actions, not by their beliefs.
Yep.
And what do we care what they believe? If they want to worship Jesus or Ganesh over in Maharashtra, that's their freedom, right? And then they want to go to church and associate with believers and sing their hymns. It's a beautiful world. It's a diverse world. And if they want to stand on their head and pray to Mother Goose, I mean, what do we care? Really, it's their life and it's their choice.
Sure.
But it's their actions that matter. And if their actions are deliberately causing unnecessary harm in the world as a result of their faith, then we can criticize that.
Yep.
And in my book, Mere Morality, I make an argument that the key word when it comes to morality is not obedience, which is like what most parents want their little toddlers to understand, like a father to a child. That's a very infantile kind of morality. The key word is harm. And when you think about it, when you're talking about morality, you're talking about harm and its avoidance, or its lessening if possible. And so I think a moral person is a person who acts with the intention of minimizing overall harm.
Agreed.
And whatever harm is, it's natural. It could be disaster, it could be hunger, it could be lack of shelter, it could be torture. I mean, there's hundreds of things you could call harmful in the world. It could be chemicals in the river. It can be, of course, it could be rape or war or whatever.
Winter.
Yeah, anything that is threatening to actually harm us in a physical way. Morality is not just following orders, because then what are those orders? What are they based on? A humanistic morality, like my harm principle, is actually grounded in something real that we can measure. You can actually look at consequences of your actions. And if you have enough information, and if you don't, you try at least to have as much information as you can. Here's this action and here's this action. Which one is going to result in the least or most amount of harm? And how do I choose? And sometimes there is no right answer. I think it's a big mistake to think that all moral questions must have one right answer. Sometimes it is muddy. Sometimes it is mushy, especially when there's a conflict of good values or a conflict of bad values. Should I vote for bully, or should I vote for stinky? Those are my choices. So I mean, I'm going to vote. Which one? So sometimes it's the lesser of two evils, or sometimes it's the greater of two goods, and sometimes something's got to give. In any event, believers, Christians, do not have a corner on morality. They don't have better life. They're not happier people. They're not more charitable people. In fact, born again Christians have a higher divorce rate than any other type of Christians, and higher than atheists even. It's like a 27% among those who have been married, 27% divorce rate among them, and it's lower for Catholics and atheists for some reason. Maybe it's harder for Catholics to get a divorce, and maybe
technically, yeah.
And maybe with atheists, it's that atheists live together, or more likely to live together before marriage, and the relationship falls apart before it becomes a statistic. You know what I mean? That's possible.
Sure. That's possible.
But in any event, believers in God don't have more moral lives. They don't have better lives. They don't have more joy or purpose or meaning or morality or any of that. And if we want to look at them and decide if they're good people or not, we look at their actions. And if, for example, their actions lead to harm, their beliefs their religious beliefs lead to harm, we will criticize that. There was a woman up in northern Wisconsin, a girl. I mean, their family let her die of easily treatable diabetes because the Bible said don't take her to the doctor. They believe that she just pray for her, and she died horribly. Their religious beliefs led to a needless death. And so I feel as a moral person, I have a right to criticize their actions.
Absolutely.
They did what they caused harm, and that was wrong, and that was mean-spirited. And you know what? Those parents are still unrepentant. They let their daughter die, and they still think they did the right thing.
Sure.
I mean, that shows you the craziness of religious thinking.
That was God has a plan, right? Allegedly, that was part of the plan.
Well, there's a 13-year-old girl died because of God's plan. So
yep.
If only there was like this evil magic thing called insulin that she could just take to, like, you know, save her life. It's just when the science confronts them in the face and they have nothing but their holy book, you see the result.
Yeah.
Like, it can't cure diabetes. Praying doesn't work.
No.
It doesn't work unless you coincidentally get better for some reason and you think it's a prayer. But I don't know if you know about Rita Swan. She died a couple of years ago, but she was the head of child, and she was with Christian Science, and they lost a child because of Christian Science teaching. And she says that many of those Christian scientists, the parents, they on the one hand, they desperately want to be true to their faith, but they also want their kids to live. And many of them are hoping somebody else will step in, some uncle or aunt or somebody else will step in and take their kid to the doctor because they can't do it. But they're really, and if you know a family like that, they're really hoping you will go ahead and do it for them because they want to be true to their belief system.
I want to. They think they can't do it, so in essence, they won't do it because of their beliefs. So they hope that somebody else might step up and do that for them, which is one of the biggest things that pisses me off about all of this. Is they believe these things that are literally, as you said earlier, causing harm to other people and their own family members, their own children. And I think that is one of the worst things about it, is that kind of harm that comes from this.
Because the kids don't get to pick. They don't ask the kids to vote on what kind of treatment they would like.
Yeah. Well, any patriarchal system is like that. The way that
true.
We just interviewed Tia Leving. She wrote that best-selling book, A Well-Trained Wife, and how
I saw that.
And we've interviewed 2 or 3 of these former, they call it purity culture.
Yeah.
And one of them was 24 years old, still living at home under her father's authority, father directing who she could date.
Wow.
You know, 24 years old. And she felt like she had this, okay. And she wanted to fall in love with somebody, but no, the family decided, no, you can't. This is not good. He's got to have at least 40,000 in the bank. He's got to have at least, they had all these rules. But patriarchal. Well, she finally broke out, and it's quite a story. Breaking away from that whole culture of like women are property. And
literal
have
property,
to be pure, and of course the Bible says that. The Bible says women are property. Look at the 10th commandment. You shall not covet. The 10th commandment was written by men for men. You shouldn't covet your neighbor's property, or cows, wealth, and wives and slaves, right? And so wives were property at that time, and they had no real rights. And it wasn't until really in the 19th century that women started to speak up and scream up for their rights to be a full person.
Not only were they property, but they weren't even worth as much as the men. There were only 50 shekels opposed to, or up against 100 shekels for it. So they were worth half as much, according to the old.
They were basically slaves. They were just
domestic
and
slaves.
Breeders, slaves and breeders.
Handmaid's Tale right there.
Yep.
All right. Well, Dan, we've gone the hour. Now, as I mentioned to you earlier, we usually do an after party, which you're under no obligation to be a part of if you are a busy man, and I get that. Normally, we just get together with some of our other folks and talk about what was said tonight a little bit, and usually other random things.
A few minutes.
Yeah,
a few minutes. Okay.
Okay. But we're going to close this one down, and I'll give you another link. We take a bit of a break between the two shows, so you want to hop in for 5-10 minutes after we get the other show going, that'd be great. Some folks could say hi, and then they'll ask questions if they have any for you, stuff like that. But until we do that, I do want to say thank you so much for allowing us to steal your time for about an hour here and a little bit of afterwards. It was really great having you on. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time because I am a fan of what you guys do at FFRF, and I'm a fan of your literature. I've got a few of your books.
He was so giddy when you said yes. He was so giddy. He'll act cool now. He's like, "Hey, with Dan Barker. It's Dan Barker." I was like, "Yeah, dude, let's go." He's so happy.
Well, I'm glad you had a good time. We try to make it a little bit add a little levity here and there, but a lot of the, of course, topics we're talking about are serious topics. So it's hard to poke fun at topics that are that serious. But
that's our job.
Hopefully things get better. You know, hopefully this whole Trump thing dies out at the end of this coming term, or maybe, who knows, maybe Trump will be chucked and Vance will take over and things will be even worse. Who knows? But because I'm afraid of that guy, I think, more than I am Trump. But yeah,
I ain't afraid of his eyeliner.
All right. Well, thanks everyone in the chat for hanging out. I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's show. If you want to be a part of the after party, just let us know and we'll get a link to you. I don't use X or Twix, as I call it now, very much anymore. So I'll drop links over on Blue Sky. If you are still on the Twix app and you want a link over there, just reach out. I do have it open for the time being, but I will be shutting that account down pretty soon because I can't stand the cesspool that it's become. So thanks everyone for hanging out with us. Also, thanks to our members. You guys are awesome. Couldn't do the show without you guys. As you guys know, I shut down the Patreon because of what happened with the whole iOS system bullshit that they're doing now for subscriptions and stuff like that. So I'm not having any of that. And thanks to oh man, no, his name just fell out of my head.
Mikey?
No. was giving out memberships. Regios, that's right. Thanks to Regios for dropping a few more memberships for our chat family. Until then, guys, like I always say at the end of the interview part of the show, like the late great Christopher Hitchens once said, it's called faith because it's not knowledge. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
All right, here we go.
Every time. He's like, all right, see ya.
No, it's just supposed to be over. It says run outro and then end the stream. See what we got?
We're still live. That's hilarious.
We're still fucking live, apparently. All right, see you later. Yeah.